Maya Chen never imagined that the knock on her penthouse door at midnight would bring back the two people who had destroyed her faith and family 12 years ago. Standing in the hallway of her luxury Seattle high-rise, drenched from the Pacific Northwest rain, were her parents, Patricia and David Chen, the same people who had thrown her belongings into garbage bags and told her to never come back the day she turned 18. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's fingers trembled as she gripped the mahogany doorframe, staring at the faces that haunted her dreams for over a decade. Patricia Chen stood there in a designer coat that couldn't quite hide the desperation in her eyes, while David shifted nervously behind her, his once proud posture now bent with what appeared to be shame. The rain from the Seattle storm had soaked through their expensive clothes, creating dark stains that seemed to mirror the darkness they had brought into Maya's life all those years ago. The last time Maya had seen these faces, she was 18 years old, clutching a hastily packed duffel bag while standing on the doorstep of their modest Bellevue home. The memory crashed over her with brutal clarity, her mother's cold voice declaring that Maya was no longer their daughter, her father's silence more devastating than any words could have been. Now, at 30 years old, Maya had built an empire from nothing, transforming herself from a rejected teenager into one of the youngest tech moguls in the Pacific Northwest. Patricia's voice cracked as she spoke first. "Maya, sweetheart, we need to talk." The endearment felt like acid on Maya's ears, a stark contrast to the harsh words that had sent her into the world alone. David stepped forward slightly, his weathered hands clasped in front of him like a supplicant approaching an altar. "Please, just give us 5 minutes. We know we don't deserve it, but there's something you need to know." Maya's mind raced back to that devastating day 12 years ago when her entire world had crumbled. She had just graduated from high school with honors, dreams of computer science college programs dancing in her head, when she made the mistake of confiding in her parents about her relationship with Emma Rodriguez, her girlfriend of 6 months. The revelation had shattered their traditional expectations like glass against concrete, unleashing a fury Maya had never witnessed from the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. The confrontation had lasted 3 brutal hours, with Patricia screaming about family reputation and religious values, while David paced the living room like a caged animal. Maya had tried to explain, tried to help them understand that love was love, that she was still their daughter, still the same person who had made them proud with her academic achievements and programming talents. But their ears had been closed, their hearts hardened by prejudice and fear of what their conservative community might think. "You're choosing this perverted lifestyle over your family," Patricia had spat, her face contorted with disgust. "If you can't live according to our values, then you can't live under our roof." David had remained silent throughout most of the argument, but his silence felt like the deepest betrayal of all. This was the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had helped her with math homework, who had once called her his little genius. Yet when she needed him most, he had simply stood by and watched her mother disown her. The packing had been methodical and cruel. Patricia had followed Maya through the house, grabbing clothes and belongings with mechanical efficiency, stuffing them into garbage bags as if Maya's entire existence was nothing more than refuse to be discarded. Photographs disappeared from frames, awards were left behind, and 18 years of motheries were reduced to whatever could fit in 3 black plastic sacks. Maya remembered standing at the front door, hoping against hope that one of them would change their mind, would remember the daughter they claimed to love. Instead, Patricia had pressed $200 into her hand with clinical detachment. "This should get you started," she had said. "Don't contact us again. You've made your choice." The door had closed with a finality that echoed in Maya's ears for months afterward. Those first weeks alone had been a special kind of hell. Maya had found herself sleeping in her car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic that barely ran, parked in the lots of 24-hour diners where she could use the restroom and buy a cup of coffee to justify her presence. The $200 stretched as far as possible, supplemented by odd jobs she could find, data entry, tutoring, anything that would put food in her stomach and gas in her tank. Seattle had become her sanctuary by accident rather than design. Maya had driven north from Bellevue, putting distance between herself and the house where she was no longer welcome, and ended up in the university district where the tech scene was beginning to flourish. A job posting at a small software company had caught her attention, and despite having no formal qualifications beyond her high school diploma, Maya's natural programming ability had impressed the hiring manager enough to give her a chance. Marcus Webb, the founder of TechStart Solutions, had become the father figure Maya desperately needed during those early years. He was a brilliant entrepreneur in his 40s who had built his company from nothing, and he recognized the same hunger in Maya's eyes that had once driven him. When Maya had shown up for her interview wearing clothes from a thrift store but carrying a portfolio of code she had written in high school, Marcus had seen potential that others might have overlooked. "Intelligence and determination can't be taught," Marcus had told her. "Everything else we can figure out together." He had offered her an entry-level position with the understanding that she would work her way up through merit and dedication. Maya accepted immediately, knowing that this opportunity was her lifeline to a future she could build with her own hands. The early months at TechStart Solutions had been a whirlwind of learning and growth. Maya absorbed everything like a sponge: programming languages, business operations, client relations, and the intricate dance of startup culture. She worked longer hours than anyone else in the office, staying late to experiment with new code and arriving early to tackle projects that others found too challenging. Her colleagues had initially been skeptical of the teenager who seemed to have appeared from nowhere, but Maya's results spoke louder than their doubts. Within 6 months, Maya had optimized the company's main software product so effectively that their client satisfaction scores jumped by 40%. Marcus had recognized her contributions with a promotion and a significant salary increase, but more importantly, he had begun treating her like a protégé rather than just an employee. Their mentoring relationship had evolved into something deeper, not romantic, but the kind of professional partnership that transcends typical workplace boundaries. Maya's living situation had gradually improved along with her career prospects. The studio apartment she rented in Capitol Hill was small but clean, a significant upgrade from sleeping in her car. She had furnished it piece by piece with items from garage sales and thrift stores, creating a space that felt uniquely hers. The walls were covered with whiteboards where she sketched out programming concepts and business ideas, turning her modest home into a laboratory for innovation. The programming projects Maya worked on during her free time had become increasingly sophisticated as her skills developed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She had identified gaps in the market that larger companies were ignoring: small business solutions, accessibility software, and tools for nonprofit organizations that couldn't afford enterprise-level systems. These side projects had started as experiments, but gradually evolved into viable products that Maya began licensing to other companies. Marcus had encouraged Maya's entrepreneurial ambitions from the beginning, understanding that truly innovative employees eventually needed to spread their wings. When Maya had approached him about potentially leaving TechStart Solutions to pursue her own ventures, he had surprised her by offering to become her first investor. "I'd rather be your partner than lose you to a competitor," he had said, with characteristic directness. The decision to start her own company had been terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Maya had spent countless nights researching business and corporation procedures, drafting business plans, and reaching out to potential clients who might be interested in her specialized software solutions. The leap from employee to entrepreneur felt like jumping off a cliff and hoping she could build wings on the way down. Chen Innovations had been born in Maya's studio apartment with nothing more than a laptop, a vision, and an unshakable determination to prove that she could build something meaningful despite the obstacles life had thrown in her path. The company's first product was accessibility software, designed to help visually impaired users navigate websites more effectively. Maya had spent months researching the specific challenges faced by this community, interviewing users, and refining her code until it performed better than anything else on the market. The breakthrough had come when a major university had purchased licenses for Maya's accessibility software and seen such positive results that they recommended it to their entire consortium of partner institutions. Within 3 months, Chen Innovations had gone from a one-person operation to a company with 12 employees and a client list that included Fortune 500 corporations. Maya's success had attracted attention from venture capital firms who were eager to invest in her rapidly growing company. The funding rounds had been intense learning experiences, requiring Maya to master the language of finance and investment while maintaining focus on the technical innovation that drove her products. She had refused several offers that would have required her to give up majority control of her company, preferring to grow more slowly while maintaining her independence. The Seattle tech community had embraced Maya as one of their rising stars, inviting her to speak at conferences and serve on advisory boards for startup accelerators. Her story of building a company from nothing resonated with other entrepreneurs who had faced their own obstacles, and Maya found herself becoming an unofficial mentor to young programmers who were trying to break into the industry. Emma Rodriguez had remained a constant presence in Maya's life throughout these tumultuous years, their relationship evolving and deepening as they both pursued their individual dreams. Emma had completed her degree in environmental science and was working for a nonprofit organization focused on climate change research, bringing her own passion for making the world better to complement Maya's technological innovations. Their relationship had weathered the storms of Maya's intense work schedule and the emotional baggage left by her family's rejection. Emma understood the drive that pushed Maya to work 16-hour days and the need for control that manifested in her business decisions. She provided stability and emotional support that allowed Maya to take the risks necessary for entrepreneurial success while maintaining her mental health and perspective. The couple had moved in together after Maya's company had achieved financial stability, finding a modern loft in South Lake Union that could serve as both their home and Maya's unofficial secondary office. The space reflected their personalities, clean lines and high-tech gadgets balanced with plants and artwork that Emma had collected from local artists. It was the first place Maya had ever lived that truly felt like home. Maya's success had not gone unnoticed by the media, and profile articles in tech magazines had begun to attract broader attention to her story. While she had been careful never to publicly discuss the circumstances of her estrangement from her family, reporters had occasionally asked about her background and the unusual path that had led her to entrepreneurship. Maya had developed standard responses that acknowledged her challenges without providing details that could be traced back to her parents. The financial growth of Chen Innovations had been exponential over the past 5 years, with the company's valuation reaching heights that Maya had never imagined possible when she first started coding in her studio apartment. Her personal wealth had grown alongside the company's success, allowing her to purchase the penthouse apartment where she now lived and invest in other startups founded by entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. Maya's philanthropic activities had become increasingly important to her as her wealth grew. She had established a foundation focused on providing technology education and resources to LGBTQ youth who had been rejected by their families, understanding from personal experience how crucial it was to have support during those vulnerable years. The foundation's programs included scholarships, mentoring, and emergency housing assistance for young people who found themselves in situations similar to what Maya had faced at 18. The irony was not lost on Maya that her success had been built partially on the foundation of rejection and abandonment that her parents had provided. Their decision to cut her off had forced her to develop resilience, creativity, and independence that might never have emerged if she had followed a more traditional path with family support. Yet the pain of their betrayal remained a constant undercurrent in her life, a wound that success and wealth could never fully heal. Standing in her doorway now, facing the people who had shaped her through their absence as much as their presence during her childhood, Maya felt the familiar mix of anger and longing that had defined her relationship with the concept of family for over a decade. Patricia and David looked older, more fragile than she remembered, their faces lined with what appeared to be years of regret and hardship. Yet Maya couldn't forget that these same faces had looked at her with disgust and disappointment when she had needed them most. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of rain against the hallway windows and the distant hum of traffic far below. Maya's hand remained on the door, ready to close it and end this unexpected reunion before it could begin. She had built a life without them, had proven that she could not only survive, but thrive despite their abandonment. The question now was whether she had any obligation to hear what they had come to say, or whether self-preservation demanded that she protect the peace she had worked so hard to create. Patricia took a tentative step forward, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor of the hallway. Maya, please, we know we hurt you terribly, but there are things you don't understand about what happened, things we couldn't tell you then, but that you need to know now. Her voice carried a desperation that Maya had never heard before, a vulnerability that stood in stark contrast to the cold certainty with which she had delivered her ultimatum 12 years earlier. David finally found his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "We've been following your success in the news. We're so proud of what you've accomplished, and we know we have no right to feel that way after what we did to you." His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from the rain or tears, Maya couldn't tell. "But we're in trouble, Maya, serious trouble, and we didn't know where else to turn." The admission hung in the air like smoke, revealing the true nature of their unexpected visit. They had not come to apologize or to reconcile out of love or regret. They had come because they needed something from her, because the success they had been reading about in magazines represented a potential solution to whatever problems they were facing. The realization struck Maya like a physical blow, confirming her worst suspicions about their motivations. Maya's grip tightened on the doorframe as she processed the implications of their words. These were the people who had told her never to contact them again, who had discarded them like unwanted furniture when she had failed to meet their expectations. Now they stood before her, admitting that they had been monitoring her success from a distance while maintaining the fiction that she was dead to them. The hypocrisy was breathtaking in its audacity. "Trouble," Maya repeated, her voice flat and emotionless. "What kind of trouble brings you to the daughter you disowned after 12 years of silence?" The words tasted bitter in her mouth, but she needed to hear them say it explicitly, needed to understand exactly how desperate they had become to swallow their pride and appear at her door. Patricia's composure finally cracked, and tears began to flow down her cheeks, mixing with the rainwater that still clung to her hair. "Your father made some bad investments. We're going to lose the house, lose everything. The lawyers say we might even face criminal charges if we can't pay back what we owe." The admission came out in a rush, as if she had been holding it back for so long that it exploded once the dam broke. David stepped forward, his hands extended in a pleading gesture that Maya remembered from her childhood when he had tried to negotiate for later bedtimes or extra dessert. "We know we have no right to ask, but we're desperate. The people we owe money to aren't the kind who accept payment plans or bankruptcy proceedings. If we can't come up with $500,000 by the end of the month, we don't know what will happen to us." The amount was staggering, but not because Maya couldn't afford it. Her company's recent acquisition deal had left her with liquid assets that made $500,000 a manageable expense. The staggering part was the presumption that she would even consider helping the people who had thrown her away when she was most vulnerable. They had taught her that love was conditional, that family was something you had to earn by conforming to their expectations. Now they wanted to apply that same transactional logic in reverse, expecting her success to obligate her to their rescue. Maya stepped back from the door, creating more physical distance between herself and these ghosts from her past. "Let me understand this correctly," she said, her voice gaining strength as her initial shock transformed into cold analysis. "You disowned me, told me never to contact you, and spent 12 years pretending I didn't exist. But you've been watching my career closely enough to know exactly how successful I've become. And now that you need money, you're willing to temporarily forget your moral objections to my lifestyle long enough to ask for a handout." The harsh summary of their situation seemed to deflate David even further, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of his choices was finally pressing down on him. Patricia, however, straightened her spine and tried to summon some of her old authority. "We made mistakes, Maya, terrible mistakes that we've regretted every day since you left. But we're still your parents, and family is supposed to help family when times get hard." The appeal to family loyalty was so audacious that Maya almost laughed. These people had redefined family to exclude her when it suited their purposes, and now they wanted to invoke family obligations when they needed financial rescue. The selective application of family bonds revealed the true transactional nature of how they viewed relationships: useful when they provided benefits, disposable when they required uncomfortable acceptance or growth. Maya could see her neighbors beginning to notice the commotion in the hallway, and she realized that this conversation needed to either end or move to a more private location. The last thing she needed was for this drama to become building gossip or social media content that could potentially damage her professional reputation. Her success had been built on careful management of her public image, and allowing her personal turmoil to spill into public spaces could undermine years of strategic positioning. "You have 5 minutes," Maya said finally, stepping back and gesturing for them to enter her apartment. "But I'm not promising anything beyond listening to what you have to say." The decision felt dangerous even as she made it, opening herself up to manipulation and emotional warfare that she had spent years learning to avoid. Yet she knew that she would never have peace until she understood exactly how desperate they had become and what they truly wanted from her. Patricia and David entered the apartment with obvious awe, their eyes scanning the soaring ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and carefully curated modern furniture that spoke of wealth and sophisticated taste. Maya watched their faces as they took in the evidence of her success, noting the mixture of pride and resentment that flickered across their features. This was the life their daughter had built without them, the prosperity that had emerged from the ashes of their rejection. The living room felt smaller with their presence, contaminated by the emotional toxicity that had driven Maya away years earlier. She gestured for them to sit on the white leather sofa while she remained standing, maintaining both physical and psychological advantage in what was clearly going to be a negotiation rather than a reconciliation. The power dynamics had shifted dramatically from that day 12 years ago when she had stood in their living room pleading for understanding. Patricia settled into the sofa with the careful movements of someone trying to project composure while internally falling apart. David perched on the edge of the cushions as if ready to flee at the first sign of hostility. The rain continued to patter against the windows, providing a soundtrack of natural chaos that seemed appropriate for the emotional storm that was brewing in Maya's carefully ordered sanctuary. "Tell me about these bad investments," Maya said, crossing her arms and leaning against the marble kitchen island that separated the living area from the gourmet kitchen she rarely used. "I want to understand exactly how you managed yourselves into a situation where you owe $500,000 to people who make threats instead of filing lawsuits." David's story emerged in fits and starts, interrupted by Patricia's attempts to minimize certain details and his own obvious shame about the choices that had led them to this moment. The narrative that eventually took shape was a familiar tale of middle-class people trying to maintain a lifestyle that exceeded their income, making increasingly desperate financial decisions until they found themselves trapped in a web of debt and deception. The troubles had started 5 years earlier, when David's consulting business had begun losing clients to younger competitors who could offer the same services at lower prices. Rather than adapting his business model or accepting reduced income, he had begun borrowing against the equity in their house to maintain their standard of living. Patricia had supported these decisions, unwilling to give up the social status that came with their Bellevue address and country club membership. The borrowed money had been invested in what David described as can't-miss opportunities recommended by friends and online investment gurus. Real estate ventures that existed only on paper, cryptocurrency schemes that promised exponential returns, and day trading strategies that required increasingly larger stakes to remain viable. Each failure had been followed by larger bets designed to recover the losses, creating a downward spiral that had consumed not only their savings, but their ability to repay the mounting debts. Maya listened to the familiar pattern of addiction and denial, recognizing the same psychological mechanisms that drive gambling addicts and substance abusers. David had become addicted to the possibility of financial salvation, unable to accept that his get-rich-quick schemes were systematically destroying everything he had worked to build. Patricia had been his enabler, supporting his decisions and helping to hide the extent of their problems from friends and extended family. The current crisis had been precipitated by David's involvement with a private lending group that had offered to consolidate his debts at what seemed like reasonable interest rates. The contract he had signed, however, contained clauses that allowed the lenders to demand immediate repayment if certain conditions were not met. When David had missed a payment due to a delayed client invoice, the entire debt had become due within 30 days, backed by threats that suggested these lenders operated outside traditional legal frameworks. So, you're telling me that you've spent 5 years making increasingly poor financial decisions, accumulated debts that you can't repay through legitimate means, and now you're being threatened by loan sharks who may resort to violence if you don't come up with their money. Maya summarized, her tone clinical and detached. And your solution is to ask the daughter you disowned to write you a check for $500,000? The stark summary seemed to shame even Patricia into silence. David nodded miserably, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles had turned white. We know how it sounds, Maya. We know we have no right to ask this of you after what we did, but we didn't know where else to turn, and when we saw that article about your company's acquisition deal, we thought— His voice trailed off, unable to complete the thought that had brought them to her door. Maya could fill in the blanks easily enough. They had calculated her net worth based on public information and determined that she could afford to solve their problems without significant hardship. The mathematical coldness of their approach revealed how they truly saw her, not as a daughter they had wronged, but as a potential financial resource to be exploited in their time of need. Maya moved to the windows, looking out at the Seattle skyline that had become the backdrop for her new life. The city lights twinkled in the rain, each one representing dreams and ambitions of people who were building their own versions of success. She had become part of this landscape through determination and talent, earning her place among the entrepreneurs and innovators who were shaping the future of technology. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. Her parents had rejected her for being true to herself, but now they wanted to benefit from the strength and independence that rejection had forced her to develop. They had inadvertently created the very person they now needed to save them, though they seemed incapable of recognizing their role in her transformation. "What makes you think I would help you?" Maya asked, turning back to face them. "You made it very clear 12 years ago that I was no longer your daughter. You told me that my choices had consequences, that actions have repercussions that can't be undone. Why should those principles apply differently when it's your choices and your consequences on the line?" Patricia leaned forward, her desperate need overcoming whatever pride she had left. "Because we know we were wrong, Maya. We've known it for years, but we were too proud and too stubborn to admit it. Seeing what you've accomplished, seeing the kind of person you've become despite everything we put you through, it's made us realize how much we lost when we lost you." The admission felt calculated, designed to appeal to Maya's emotional vulnerabilities rather than representing genuine remorse. Maya had heard similar words from manipulative clients and business partners who would say anything to get what they wanted. The question was whether her parents were consciously manipulating her or simply so desperate that they had convinced themselves their motives were purer than they actually were. David stood up abruptly, beginning to pace in the small space between the sofa and coffee table. "We've followed your career from the beginning, Maya. Every article, every interview, every award you received. We were so proud of what you were doing, but we didn't know how to reach out after so much time had passed. We told ourselves it was too late, that you were better off without us." The revelation that they had been watching her success from a distance felt like a violation of the privacy she had tried to maintain around her personal life. Maya had carefully crafted her public persona to focus on her professional achievements while keeping her family background deliberately vague. Learning that her parents had been consuming this content while maintaining their silence added another layer of deception to their already complex relationship. "If you were so proud, if you realized you were wrong, why didn't you contact me before you needed money?" Maya asked, the question cutting through their justifications like a blade. "Why wait until you're facing financial ruin to suddenly remember that you have a daughter?" The silence that followed was deafening, confirming Maya's suspicions about their true motivations. They had not come to reconcile or to rebuild their relationship. They had come because her success represented their last hope for avoiding the consequences of David's financial mismanagement. The timing of their appearance, coinciding perfectly with their crisis and her public wealth, revealed the transactional nature of their renewed interest in having a daughter. Maya felt a familiar anger building in her chest, the same rage that had sustained her through those early months of homelessness and uncertainty. These people had taught her that love was conditional, that acceptance had to be earned by conforming to their expectations. They had shown her that family bonds could be severed whenever they became inconvenient or challenging. Now they expect her to ignore those lessons and provide unconditional financial support based on biological relationships they had already severed. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing force, as if nature itself was responding to the emotional storm brewing inside the apartment. Maya's carefully controlled world was being invaded by chaos she had spent 12 years learning to avoid. And every instinct told her to end this encounter before it could inflict more damage on the life she had built. Yet something held her back from throwing them out immediately. Perhaps it was curiosity about how far they would go in their desperation, or maybe it was a desire to finally have the confrontation that had been building for 12 years. Maya had imagined this reunion countless times, but she had always pictured herself as the one with something to prove, not the one being asked for salvation. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that Maya almost felt dizzy trying to process the implications.
She was no longer the vulnerable 18-year-old begging for acceptance and support. She was now the successful adult with resources and options, while her parents had become the desperate supplicants hoping for mercy from someone they had wronged. The reversal was so complete that it felt almost fictional, like a plot twist in a morality play about the consequences of treating family as disposable. Patricia's voice broke through Maya's contemplation, small and broken in a way that Maya had never heard before. We know we destroyed any right we had to call ourselves your parents, but we're asking not because we deserve help, but because we don't know what else to do. The people we owe money to have made it clear that this isn't just about money anymore. We're scared, Maya, really scared. The admission of fear was perhaps the most honest thing either of her parents had said since arriving at her door. Maya could see the terror in their eyes, the recognition that their financial games had finally caught up with them in ways that threatened more than just their comfort or status. They had ventured into dangerous territory, where the rules were enforced through intimidation and violence rather than legal proceedings. Maya realized that she was facing a decision that would define not only her relationship with her parents, but also her own understanding of who she had become through years of success and independence. She could afford to help them without significant financial hardship, but doing so would validate their decision to abandon her until they needed something. Refusing would potentially expose them to genuine physical danger, but it would also maintain the boundaries she had established to protect herself from their toxicity. The choice was complicated by Maya's awareness that her parents' current predicament was not entirely dissimilar to the vulnerable position she had found herself in at 18. They were facing the loss of everything they had known, potentially including their physical safety, due to circumstances that had spiraled beyond their control. The parallel was uncomfortable because it forced Maya to confront whether she had the capacity for mercy that they had lacked when she needed it most. Standing in her luxury apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her success and independence, Maya realized that this moment was about more than money or family reconciliation. It was about deciding what kind of person she had become through her years of struggle and achievement. The scared teenager who had once begged for acceptance was gone, replaced by a confident entrepreneur who had the power to change lives with a single decision. The question was whether she would use that power to perpetuate the cycle of conditional love her parents had created, or whether she would demonstrate a different way of defining family relationships. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, and Maya understood that the weather was providing a perfect metaphor for the emotional chaos that had invaded her carefully ordered world. Like the rain that was washing over the city, this encounter with her parents would eventually pass, but not without leaving lasting changes in the landscape of her life. The only question was whether those changes would represent healing or further damage to relationships that had already been strained beyond most people's capacity to repair. Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever would come next, knowing that the next words spoken would determine not only the fate of her parents, but also the direction of her own emotional future. Maya walked to her home office, leaving her parents sitting in uncomfortable silence on the white leather sofa. She needed space to process what she had just learned, and more importantly, she needed to verify their claims before making any decisions that could impact her carefully constructed life. The office was her sanctuary within her sanctuary, a room lined with awards, patents, and photographs documenting her journey from homeless teenager to successful entrepreneur. Behind her polished mahogany desk, Maya opened her laptop and began searching for information about her parents' current situation. Public records revealed that David and Patricia Chen had indeed mortgaged their Bellevue home multiple times, with the most recent refinancing occurring just 8 months earlier. The property tax records showed liens and judgments that painted a clear picture of escalating financial distress. A deeper search revealed David's business registration had been suspended for failure to maintain required insurance and bonding, while court records showed several civil judgments against both him and Patricia for unpaid debts to various creditors. The paper trail confirmed the broad outlines of their story, though Maya suspected there were still details they had omitted or minimized in their desperate attempt to gain her sympathy. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Emma, who was attending a climate research conference in Portland. "How did the board meeting go today? Still on for dinner tomorrow when I get back?" The normalcy of the message felt surreal against the backdrop of the crisis that had invaded Maya's apartment. Emma had no idea that the ghosts from Maya's past were currently sitting in their living room, disrupting the peaceful life they had built together. The investigation into her parents' situation consumed the better part of an hour, during which Maya could hear Patricia and David whispering urgently in the living room. Occasionally, their voices would rise enough for her to catch fragments, references to deadlines, threats, and the growing desperation that had driven them to seek her help. The irony was not lost on Maya that she was conducting the same kind of due diligence on her parents that she would perform on any potential business investment. When Maya returned to the living room, she found her parents exactly where she had left them, though they appeared even more deflated and anxious than before. Patricia had been crying again, her carefully applied makeup now streaked and ruined. David sat staring out the rain-soaked windows with the hollow expression of a man who had run out of options and was facing consequences he had never imagined possible. "I verified most of what you told me," Maya said, settling into the chair across from them rather than joining them on the sofa. The physical distance felt necessary to maintain her emotional equilibrium in the face of their obvious distress. "Your house has multiple liens, David's business license has been suspended, and there are several judgments against you both. What you haven't explained is why you thought involving yourselves with private lenders when you were already in financial trouble." David's answer came slowly, each word seeming to cost him considerable effort. "The bank wouldn't extend our credit line anymore, and traditional lenders wanted assets we didn't have available for collateral. These people approached us through a referral from someone at the country club who said they had helped him through a similar situation. They promised flexible terms and reasonable interest rates for people with temporary cash flow problems." Maya recognized the classic pattern of predatory lending, targeting desperate people with promises that seemed reasonable until the fine print revealed the true cost of the arrangement. "Did you have a lawyer review the contract before you signed it?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Patricia shook her head miserably. "They said it was a standard agreement, and we were so relieved to find someone willing to help that we didn't want to delay the process. David read through it, and it seemed straightforward enough. We thought we could make the payments and refinance through traditional channels once David's business recovered."
The naivety of their approach would have been touching if it weren't so dangerous. Maya had spent years learning to scrutinize every contract and agreement, understanding that the business world was filled with people who would exploit others' desperation for profit. Her parents had apparently never developed those instincts, approaching their financial crisis with the same trusting attitude that had probably contributed to their problems in the first place. "Tell me about these threats," Maya said. "What exactly have they told you will happen if you don't pay by their deadline?" She needed to understand the full scope of the danger her parents were facing, partly out of genuine concern for their safety, and partly to gauge whether their fear was proportionate to the actual risk. David's hands shook as he described the escalating pressure campaign that had begun 3 weeks earlier when they had missed their first payment. Initial phone calls had given way to visits to their home and business, with increasingly explicit descriptions of what would happen if the debt remained unpaid. The lenders had made it clear that they considered the debt a personal matter that would be resolved through personal consequences rather than legal proceedings. They know where we live, where we shop, what our routines are, Patricia added, her voice barely above a whisper. Yesterday, they left a photograph under our windshield wiper, a picture of us leaving the grocery store with a note saying they could find us anywhere. We've been staying in hotels, but we can't keep that up forever, and we don't have friends or family we can turn to. Maya felt a chill at the description of the surveillance and intimidation tactics her parents were experiencing. These were not the methods of legitimate business people seeking to recover debts through appropriate channels. Her parents had gotten involved with criminals who operated outside the legal system and were willing to use fear and violence to enforce their agreements. The realization that her parents were facing genuine physical danger complicated Maya's emotional response to their situation. She could despise their abandonment of her while simultaneously recognizing that no one deserved to be terrorized by loan sharks who viewed intimidation as a standard business practice. The moral calculus became more complex when the stakes involved potential violence rather than just financial consequences. "Have you contacted the police about the threats?" Maya asked, though she suspected her parents had been too ashamed or frightened to involve law enforcement in their crisis. People who found themselves dealing with predatory lenders often hesitated to seek official help due to embarrassment about their poor decisions or fear of making their situation worse. David's bitter laugh confirmed her suspicions. "And tell them what? That we voluntarily borrowed money from criminals and now we're surprised they're acting like criminals? We signed their contract, Maya. Legally, we owe them the money, and everything else is just their word against ours about how they've been collecting it." Maya understood his logic, but she also knew that intimidation and harassment were illegal regardless of the underlying debt relationship. Her parents' shame about their financial mistakes was preventing them from seeking help through appropriate channels, leaving them more vulnerable to escalating threats and potentially violence. The situation presented Maya with a complex web of competing considerations that had no clear resolution. Her parents had made a series of poor decisions that had led them into genuine danger, but helping them would require her to set aside 12 years of hurt and anger while potentially enabling their continued poor judgment. Refusing to help might result in serious harm to people who, despite their flaws and caste cruelty, had once been the most important figures in her childhood. Maya stood and moved to the kitchen, ostensibly to get water, but really to create physical space while she processed the implications of what she had learned. The granite countertops and stainless steel appliances reflected her image back at her, reminding her of how far she had come from the frightened teenager who had once stood in her parents' living room begging for understanding and acceptance. The contrast between her current position of power and her parents' desperate vulnerability was so stark that it felt almost surreal. She was now the one with resources and options, while they had become the supplicants, hoping for mercy from someone they had wronged. The reversal was so complete that Maya struggled to reconcile her memories of their past authority with the defeated people sitting in her living room. From the kitchen, Maya could observe her parents without them realizing they were being watched. Patricia sat with her shoulders hunched, periodically wiping away tears with tissues from her purse. David continued staring out the windows, but his expression had shifted from hollow despair to something that looked like calculation. Maya wondered what new scheme he might be developing, whether he was planning additional arguments to convince her to help or considering other potential sources of rescue. The more Maya watched them, the more she noticed details that suggested their financial problems might be even worse than they had admitted. Patricia's designer coat was several seasons out of date, and closer inspection revealed that it had been mended in several places with careful stitching that attempted to hide wear and damage. David's shoes were expensive but badly worn, suggesting he could no longer afford to replace items that had once routinely updated. Maya's investigation had revealed the broad outlines of their financial distress, but observing them now provided insight into how dramatically their lifestyle had been affected. These were people who had once been meticulous about their appearance and social status, but desperation had forced them to maintain facades they could no longer afford. The psychological toll of their situation was evident in every detail of their presentation. Maya returned to the living room with a glass of water she didn't really want, using the prop to give her hands something to do while she continued evaluating her options. Her parents looked up at her with expressions of desperate hope, clearly interpreting her return as a positive sign that she might be willing to help them despite their history. "I need to understand something," Maya said, settling back into her chair. "You claim that you've regretted disowning me for years, that you've been following my career and feeling proud of my success. If that's true, why didn't you reach out before you needed money? Why wait until you're facing threats from loan sharks to suddenly remember you have a daughter?" The question struck at the heart of Maya's skepticism about their motivations. Their timing was too convenient, their desperation too complete for her to believe that their sudden interest in reconciliation was motivated by genuine remorse rather than financial necessity. She needed to hear them acknowledge the transactional nature of their reappearance in her life before she could even consider how to respond to their crisis. Patricia's response came in a rush, as if she had been rehearsing this explanation during Maya's absence. "We wanted to contact you so many times over the years, but we didn't know how to apologize for something so terrible. We kept telling ourselves that you were better off without us, that we would only cause you more pain by trying to come back into your life. We were cowards, Maya. We were too ashamed of what we had done to face you until we were desperate enough to overcome our shame."
The explanation sounded plausible, but Maya had learned to be suspicious of stories that were too perfectly crafted to appeal to her emotional vulnerabilities. People in desperate situations often became skilled at telling others exactly what they wanted to hear, and her parents had clearly spent considerable time thinking about how to present their case in the most sympathetic light possible. David's contribution to their defense was less polished, but felt more genuine in its obvious discomfort. "We told ourselves we were protecting you from having to deal with us, but the truth is we were protecting ourselves from having to face what we had done. Every year that passed made it harder to imagine how we could possibly make things right, so we convinced ourselves it was better to leave you alone." Maya recognized the psychological pattern David was describing, the way guilt and shame could create paralysis that prevented people from taking actions that might lead to forgiveness or healing. She had seen similar dynamics in business relationships where minor conflicts escalated into permanent rifts because neither party wanted to risk the vulnerability required for reconciliation. Yet, understanding the psychology behind her parents' silence didn't change the fact that they had chosen their own comfort over her well-being for 12 years. They had allowed her to build her entire adult life without any family support or connection, watching from a distance as she struggled and succeeded, but never offering the relationship that might have made those challenges easier to bear. "So you're telling me that for 12 years, you chose to avoid the discomfort of apologizing over the possibility of having a relationship with your daughter," Maya summarized. "But now that you're facing physical threats and financial ruin, you've suddenly found the courage to overcome your shame and ask for help." The stark framing of their choices seemed to physically pain her parents, both of them flinching as if Maya had struck them. Yet neither attempted to deny the accuracy of her assessment, perhaps recognizing that any further attempts at justification would only reinforce the impression that their motivations were entirely self-serving. Patricia's voice was barely audible when she finally responded. "We know how it looks, Maya. We know that coming to you now, when we need help, makes it seem like we don't really care about you as a person. But the truth is that we've thought about you every day since you left, wondered how you were doing, worried about whether you were safe and happy. We just didn't know how to bridge the gap we had created." Maya felt a familiar anger building in her chest at the suggestion that her parents had been worrying about her safety and happiness while maintaining complete silence about their concerns. If they had truly been worried, they could have found ways to check on her well-being without necessarily expecting forgiveness or reconciliation. Their claimed concern felt like another manipulation designed to make her feel guilty for doubting their motives. "You could have hired a private investigator to verify I was safe without making contact," Maya pointed out. "You could have made anonymous donations to causes you knew I cared about. You could have sent birthday cards with no return address. There were dozens of ways you could have expressed concern for my well-being without risking your own emotional comfort.
Instead, you chose complete silence while apparently monitoring my professional success through media coverage. The logic of her argument was irrefutable, and Maya could see her parents struggling to find responses that wouldn't further damage their already weak position. They had created a narrative that cast them as victims of their own shame and guilt, but Maya's analysis revealed the self-serving nature of their choices at every step. David's shoulders sagged as he abandoned any pretense of justifying their behavior. "You're right, Maya. Everything you're saying is right. We were selfish and cowardly, and we chose our own comfort over your well-being at every step. We don't deserve your help, and we have no right to ask for it. But we're asking anyway because we don't know what else to do." The admission of selfishness was perhaps the most honest thing either of her parents had said since arriving at her door. Maya found herself respecting David's willingness to abandon his justifications and acknowledge the reality of their situation, even though his honesty didn't change the fundamental facts of their relationship or their current crisis. Maya walked to the windows again, looking out at the Seattle skyline that had become the backdrop for her new life. The rain had intensified into a full storm, with wind driving sheets of water against the glass, and lightning illuminating the clouds that obscured the tops of the downtown skyscrapers. The weather seemed to mirror the emotional tempest that had invaded her carefully ordered world. Standing at the windows, Maya could see her reflections superimposed over the city lights, creating a double exposure that seemed symbolic of her current situation. She was simultaneously the successful entrepreneur who had built an empire from nothing, and the abandoned teenager who still carried the wounds of her parents' rejection. Both versions of herself existed in this moment, and the decision she made would determine which one would define her response to this crisis. Maya's phone buzzed with another message, this time from Marcus Webb, her former boss and current business partner. "Saw the news about the Chen Industries acquisition. Congratulations on building something incredible. Let's celebrate when you have time." The reminder of her professional success felt surreal against the backdrop of the personal drama unfolding in her apartment. The contrast between her public life and private turmoil highlighted the compartmentalization that had allowed Maya to function and thrive despite the emotional void left by her parents' abandonment. She had learned to separate her professional achievements from her personal pain, building a career that provided validation and purpose even when family relationships remained broken. Yet the arrival of her parents threatened to collapse those careful boundaries, forcing Maya to confront the ways her past had shaped her present and would inevitably influence her future. The decision she made about helping them would establish precedents for how she handled family relationships going forward, potentially affecting her marriage to Emma and any children they might have in the future. Maya turned back to face her parents, who were watching her with the desperate attention of people whose fate hung in the balance of her next words. The power dynamic was so dramatically reversed from their last encounter that Maya felt disoriented by the responsibility of holding their future in her hands. "I need to make some phone calls," Maya announced, moving toward her office again. "I want to understand exactly what kind of danger you're facing and what options might be available besides paying off these loan sharks. Don't leave this apartment until I get back." The command was delivered with the authority Maya had learned to project in business negotiations, and her parents nodded with the submissiveness of people who had surrendered control over their own destiny. Maya realized that she was taking charge of their crisis whether she ultimately decided to help them financially or not, stepping into a protective role that felt both natural and deeply uncomfortable. In her office, Maya began making calls to contacts in law enforcement and legal circles, seeking advice about how to handle situations involving predatory lenders and illegal debt collection practices. Her network of professional relationships included several attorneys who specialized in financial crimes, and Maya had enough influence in the Seattle business community to get their attention even during evening hours. The conversations that followed painted a disturbing picture of the world her parents had entered by borrowing from private lenders who operated outside traditional financial regulations. These organizations often targeted desperate people with legitimate financial problems, offering solutions that seemed reasonable until borrowers found themselves trapped in cycles of escalating debt and intimidation. Maya learned that law enforcement agencies were aware of several such groups operating in the Seattle area, but prosecuting them was complicated by the fact that their initial contracts were often technically legal, even if their collection methods crossed into criminal territory. Victims were frequently reluctant to cooperate with investigations due to shame about their financial situations or fear of retribution from the lenders. One attorney Maya spoke with had experience representing clients in similar situations and offered to review her parents' contract and assess their legal options. Another contact in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division explained the federal resources available for investigating organized lending schemes that used interstate commerce to exploit vulnerable borrowers. The information Maya gathered revealed that her parents had more options than they realized, but pursuing them would require courage they had not yet demonstrated and patience they probably didn't have given the 30-day deadline they were facing. Legal solutions would take time to develop and implement, while their immediate safety concerns demanded more urgent action. Maya also researched the specific lending organization her parents had borrowed from, using business databases and court records to understand their history and methods. The pattern that emerged was deeply troubling. Dozens of civil judgments, several criminal investigations, and a network of shell companies designed to obscure the true ownership and operations of the lending business. The research confirmed Maya's suspicions that her parents had not simply made a poor financial decision, but had actually become victims of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that specialized in exploiting people's desperation for profit. While their initial choices had been unwise, they had been deliberately targeted by predators who understood exactly how to manipulate vulnerable borrowers into accepting dangerous terms. This new understanding complicated Maya's feelings about her parents' situation without entirely changing her assessment of their motivations for contacting her. They were both victims of predatory lenders and manipulative parents who had chosen to involve her only when they needed financial rescue. Both things could be true simultaneously, and Maya needed to figure out how to respond to their complex reality. Maya spent nearly 2 hours on the phone, gathering information and exploring options before returning to the living room where her parents remained exactly where she had left them. They looked up at her arrival with expressions of desperate hope mixed with fear about what she might have learned during her investigation. "The good news is that you're not as powerless as you think," Maya began, settling back into her chair. "The people you borrowed from are under investigation by federal authorities, and there are legal options available to challenge their collection methods and potentially void your contract. The bad news is that pursuing those options will take time you probably don't have, and it will require you to cooperate with law enforcement in ways that might temporarily increase your risk." Patricia leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of cooperation? What would we have to do?" The desperation in her voice was palpable, suggesting that she would consider almost any alternative to remaining trapped in their current situation. Maya explained what she had learned about the lending organization and the federal investigation that was already underway. Her parents could potentially become witnesses in a criminal prosecution that might not only void their debt, but also help protect other potential victims from similar exploitation. The process would require them to document their interactions with the lenders and potentially testify in federal court. David's reaction was immediate and negative. "We can't do that, Maya. These people made it clear what happens to borrowers who cause problems for them. If we cooperate with federal investigators, we'll be putting ourselves in even more danger than we're already facing." Maya had expected this response, understanding that her parents' fear was preventing them from seeing options that might provide long-term solutions to their crisis. Their focus on immediate survival was understandable, but counterproductive if it prevented them from taking actions that could eliminate the threat permanently. "The FBI contact I spoke with said they could provide witness protection services if you're willing to cooperate with their investigation," Maya explained. "It's not a perfect solution, but it would give you safety while the legal process unfolds, and it might ultimately result in criminal charges that would prevent these people from threatening you or anyone else in the future." The offer of federal protection seemed to intrigue Patricia, but David remained skeptical. "How long would that take? How long would we have to live in hiding while waiting for a trial that might not even result in convictions? We're not young people, Maya. We don't have decades to spare waiting for justice to take its course." Maya recognized the validity of her father's concerns while also seeing the flaws in his logic. Their current situation already had them living in fear and hiding from their creditors, so federal protection might not represent a significant change in their lifestyle while providing much better security and legal support. The alternative is paying them the money they're demanding and hoping they don't come back for more, Maya pointed out. From what I've learned about this organization, borrowers who pay their initial debts often find themselves being approached for additional investment opportunities that create new cycles of debt and dependence. Paying them might solve your immediate problem while guaranteeing you'll face similar crises in the future. The information Maya had gathered suggested that her parents' lenders operated more like organized crime than legitimate financial services, using successful collections to identify vulnerable targets for future exploitation. Helping her parents pay their current debt might simply reset the cycle that had led to their current crisis. Maya could see her parents processing this information, their expressions shifting as they recognized the implications of what she was telling them. They had been thinking about their crisis in terms of a single transaction that could be resolved with one large payment. But Maya's research revealed a more complex and dangerous situation that required strategic thinking rather than just financial resources. There's something else you need to understand, Maya continued. The amount you currently owe is just the beginning. Based on the contracts I've seen from this organization, they have provisions that allow them to add fees, penalties, and additional interest charges that can multiply the debt exponentially. Even if someone gave you $500,000 today, you might find yourself owing twice that amount within 6 months. Patricia's face went white as she absorbed the implications of Maya's warning. Are you saying that paying them wouldn't solve our problem? Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking the words too loudly might make them more true. Maya nodded grimly. I'm saying that from their perspective, you're more valuable as ongoing sources of payments and referrals than as borrowers who pay off their debts and disappear. They want to keep you trapped in their system for as long as possible, extracting maximum profit from your desperation. The revelation seemed to physically deflate David, who slumped back into the sofa cushions as if the weight of their situation had finally become too much to bear.
So there's no solution that doesn't involve risk, he said flatly. We can pay them and probably face bigger demands in the future, or we can fight them and risk immediate retaliation. Maya could see that her parents were finally beginning to understand the true nature of their predicament. They had been hoping for a simple solution that would restore their previous life without requiring them to confront the criminal organization they had become involved with. Instead, they were learning that every option carried significant risks and required difficult choices about what kind of future they wanted to pursue. The storm outside had reached its peak intensity, with thunder shaking the building and lightning providing dramatic illumination for their conversation. Maya found herself thinking about the parallels between the natural chaos outside and the emotional tempest that had been unleashed by her parents' arrival. Both storms would eventually pass, but not without leaving lasting changes in their wake. Maya stood and moved to her desk, pulling out a legal pad where she began sketching out the various options available to her parents. The visual representation helped clarify the choices they were facing and the potential consequences of each course of action. She realized that she was instinctively applying the same analytical framework she used for business decisions to her parents' personal crisis. Here's what I see as your realistic options, Maya said, turning the pad so her parents could see her notes. Option 1. You pay the current debt and hope they don't create new obligations, knowing that you'll probably face similar crises in the future. Option 2. You cooperate with federal investigators, accept witness protection, and help build a case that could eliminate the threat permanently, but might take months or years to resolve. Option 3. You disappear entirely, change your identities, and start over somewhere else with no guarantee that they won't track you down. The stark presentation of their choices seemed to focus her parents' attention in ways that their earlier emotional appeals had not. Maya could see them studying the options, weighing the risks and benefits of each approach with the seriousness their situation demanded. Patricia spoke first, her voice steadier than it had been all evening. What would witness protection actually involve? Where would we live, and how would we survive financially while the case was being built? Her questions suggested that she was seriously considering the legal option, despite David's earlier objections. Maya had asked similar questions during her conversations with federal contacts, and she relayed what she had learned about the witness protection process.
Her parents would be relocated to a secure location, provided with new identities if necessary, and given financial support sufficient to maintain basic living standards while the investigation proceeded. The protection would continue through any resulting trial and potentially beyond if the threat remained credible. David's reaction was more emotional than analytical. So we'd have to give up everything we've worked for, abandon our entire lives, and trust federal agents to keep us safe from people who've already proven they can find us anywhere? That doesn't sound like protection. It sounds like a different kind of prison. Maya understood his resistance while also recognizing the flawed thinking behind it. Her parents had already lost everything they had worked for through David's poor financial decisions, and their current situation was already a form of prison created by fear and debt. Witness protection might actually represent more freedom than they currently possessed. "Dad, you've already lost your house, your business, and your security," Maya pointed out gently. "The life you're trying to protect doesn't exist anymore. The question is whether you want to build a new life with federal support and legal protection, or whether you want to keep running from people who will eventually find you." The harsh reality of Maya's assessment was undeniable, but it seemed to break through David's denial about their situation. Maya could see him beginning to accept that their old life was gone, regardless of what decisions they made going forward. The only question was whether their new life would be defined by continued fear or by the possibility of safety and justice. Patricia reached over and took David's hand, a gesture of solidarity that reminded Maya of the partnership her parents had once represented in her childhood memories. "Maybe we need to stop thinking about what we're losing and start thinking about what we might gain," Patricia said quietly. "We've been so focused on trying to get back to where we were that we haven't considered whether where we were was actually worth returning to." The insight surprised Maya with its wisdom and self-awareness. Patricia was suggesting that their crisis might be an opportunity to examine the values and choices that had led to their current predicament, rather than simply trying to restore the status quo that had proven unsustainable. Maya found herself seeing her mother in a new light, recognizing an intelligence and capacity for growth that had been obscured by years of resentment and disappointment. Perhaps the crisis that had brought her parents to her door might also force them to confront aspects of themselves that had remained hidden during their years of comfortable denial. "There's one more option we haven't discussed," Maya said, making a decision that surprised even her. "I could help you financially, but not in the way you originally asked. Instead of just giving you money to pay off the loan sharks, I could fund a comprehensive legal strategy that includes temporary protection, federal cooperation, and civil litigation to recover damages from the lending organization." The proposal represented a middle ground that addressed both Maya's desire to protect her parents from physical harm and her reluctance to simply enable their continued poor judgment. Patricia's eyes filled with tears as she processed Maya's offer. "You would do that for us? After everything we did to you, you would still help us?" The disbelief in her voice suggested that she had not expected Maya to offer any assistance, perhaps just listening to their story. Maya looked at both of her parents, seeing them not as the powerful authority figures from her childhood or the cruel abandoners from her adolescence, but as flawed human beings who had made terrible mistakes and were now facing consequences that exceeded their ability to cope. The perspective shift didn't erase her anger or hurt, but it allowed her to respond to their humanity rather than just their history. "I'm not doing it because you deserve it," Maya said carefully. "I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and because the person I've become through surviving your abandonment is someone who believes in justice over revenge." The distinction was important to Maya, clarifying that her help came from her own values rather than from any obligation to forgive or restore their relationship. David broke down completely at Maya's words, sobbing with a release of tension and fear that had apparently been building for months. "Thank you," he managed between sobs. "Thank you for being better than we were, better than we deserved."
Maya felt a complex mix of emotions watching her father cry. Satisfaction at his acknowledgement of their failures, sadness for the pain they had all endured, and a tentative hope that this crisis might ultimately lead to something resembling healing, even if it could never restore the relationship they had destroyed 12 years earlier. The storm outside was beginning to subside, the thunder growing more distant, and the rain settling into a steady rhythm that no longer threatened to shatter the windows.
Maya took it as a sign that the emotional tempest in her apartment might also be moving towards some kind of resolution, though she knew the real work of addressing their complex situation was only beginning. As Maya began making notes about the legal strategy she would fund, she realized that her decision to help her parents represented more than just a financial transaction. It was a declaration of the kind of person she had chosen to become through her years of independence and success, someone who could act with strength and wisdom even in the face of old wounds and justified anger. The road ahead would be complicated and uncertain, requiring her parents to make difficult choices about their future, while Maya navigated the delicate balance between providing help and maintaining the boundaries necessary to protect her own well-being. Yet, for the first time since their arrival, Maya felt that they were moving towards solutions rather than just managing crises. The night was far from over, and many difficult conversations still lay ahead. But Maya had made her choice, and in doing so, she had chosen to define herself by her capacity for justice and wisdom rather than by the wounds inflicted by people who had once been unable to love her unconditionally. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating, opening possibilities for a future none of them could have imagined when the night began. Maya's first call the following morning was to Robert Harrison, a federal prosecutor she had met at a technology law conference 2 years earlier. Harrison specialized in organized financial crimes and had built a reputation for successfully prosecuting predatory lending operations that targeted vulnerable populations. When Maya explained her parents' situation, Harrison's immediate interest confirmed her suspicions that they had become entangled with a criminal organization already on federal radar. The Pacific Northwest Financial Group has been operating under various names for over 5 years, Harrison explained during their early morning phone call. We've been building a case, but we need witnesses willing to cooperate. Your parents could be exactly what we need to move forward with indictments. Maya arranged to meet Harrison at his downtown Seattle office later that afternoon, bringing her parents with her so they could hear the federal perspective directly rather than through her interpretation. The morning hours between the phone call and the meeting passed slowly, with Maya working from her home office while her parents sat in her living room like refugees waiting for news about their asylum applications. Patricia had spent most of the night crying softly, processing 12 years of suppressed grief about losing her daughter, combined with terror about their current predicament. David remained largely silent, staring out the windows at the city where his daughter had built a fortune while he had been destroying his own financial security through increasingly desperate schemes. Maya found herself studying her parents whenever she emerged from her office, noting details that had been obscured by the drama of their late-night arrival. Both looked significantly older than their actual ages, worn down by months of stress and fear. Patricia's hands shook when she thought no one was watching, and David had developed a nervous habit of checking his phone constantly, as if expecting threatening messages from their creditors. The psychological toll of their situation was becoming more apparent as the shock of their reunion wore off and the reality of their predicament settled in. These were people who had lived comfortable, predictable lives until David's financial gambling had introduced chaos they were completely unprepared to handle. The loan sharks had not just threatened their finances, but had shattered their sense of security and control over their own existence. Maya's research into the Pacific Northwest Financial Group continued throughout the morning, revealing an operation that was far more sophisticated than typical predatory lenders. The organization used data mining techniques to identify potential targets, employed psychological manipulation tactics to convince borrowers to accept increasingly unfavorable terms, and maintained a network of collection agents who specialized in intimidation and harassment. Court records showed that the group had been named in over 200 civil lawsuits during the past 3 years, but most cases had been settled out of court with confidentiality agreements that prevented victims from sharing information about their experiences. The pattern suggested a systematic approach to exploiting legal loopholes while avoiding criminal prosecution through careful structuring of their operations. Maya discovered that several borrowers who had attempted to fight the organization through civil litigation had ultimately been forced to accept settlements that left them worse than when they started. The legal costs of challenging the group's practices often exceeded the original debts, creating a situation where victims were punished for seeking justice through appropriate channels. The information painted a disturbing picture of an organization that had weaponized the legal system against its victims, using the complexity and expensive litigation to discourage challenges to their practices. Maya realized that her parents had been fortunate to contact her before attempting to fight their situation alone, as they would likely have been crushed by legal costs that exceeded their ability to pay. Emma called during Maya's research, having seen news reports about severe weather in Seattle and wanting to ensure Maya was safe. The storm looked terrible on the news, Emma said, her concern evident even through the phone connection. Are you okay? Did the building lose power or have any damage? Maya found herself hesitating before answering, unsure how much to reveal about the personal storm that had arrived with her parents. She and Emma had built their relationship on honesty and openness, but the current situation felt too complex and emotionally charged to explain over the phone while Emma was hundreds of miles away at her conference. The building is fine, and I'm safe, Maya said finally, but I've had some unexpected family developments that I'll need to tell you about when you get back. Nothing that affects us directly, but it's complicated. The carefully neutral language felt inadequate to describe the upheaval of the past 12 hours, but Maya knew that Emma deserved to hear the full story in person rather than through a hurried phone conversation. Emma's response revealed her understanding of Maya's communication patterns. Family developments involving the family you haven't spoken to in over a decade? She asked gently. Are you sure you're okay? Do you need me to come home early? Maya's heart swelled with appreciation for Emma's immediate offer to abandon her professional commitments in order to provide support. Their relationship had been built on mutual respect for each other's independence, but Emma had always demonstrated her willingness to prioritize Maya's well-being when circumstances demanded it. I'm okay for now, but I'll definitely need to talk through everything when you get back tomorrow, Maya replied. The situation is under control, but it's going to require some difficult decisions over the next few weeks. I love you for offering to come home early, but I think I need to work through the initial crisis before we discuss how it might affect our future. The conversation reminded Maya of the life she had built with Emma, the stability and love that had helped heal many of the wounds left by her parents' abandonment. Whatever happened with her parents' crisis, Maya was determined to protect the relationship that had become the foundation of her emotional security. After ending the call with Emma, Maya returned to the living room where her parents were sitting in the same positions they had occupied for most of the morning. The sight of them waiting passively for her to manage their crisis struck Maya as symbolic of the reversal in their family dynamics. She had become the parent figure, making decisions and taking action, while they sat helplessly hoping for rescue. The federal prosecutor wants to meet with you this afternoon, Maya announced.
Robert Harrison has been building a case against the organization you borrowed from, and he thinks your cooperation could be crucial to securing indictments. But before we go to that meeting, I need you to understand what cooperation will mean and what risks you'll be taking. Maya had prepared a detailed explanation of the witness protection process, including the lifestyle changes her parents would need to accept and the timeline they could expect for resolution of their case. The information was sobering, requiring them to acknowledge that their old life was over, regardless of what legal strategies they pursued. Patricia listened intently to Maya's presentation, asking detailed questions about housing arrangements, financial support, and the level of security they could expect. Her questions suggested that she was seriously considering the federal cooperation option, despite the obvious challenges and uncertainties involved. David's reactions were more emotional and less practical. How can we trust federal agents to keep us safe when we don't even know if they can successfully prosecute these people? He asked repeatedly. What happens if the case falls apart and we're left exposed without any protection? Maya understood her father's concerns, while recognizing that his focus on worst-case scenarios was preventing him from evaluating the realistic alternatives available to them. His fear was understandable but counterproductive if it paralyzed him from taking actions that might improve their situation. Dad, the alternative to cooperation isn't safety, Maya pointed out. The alternative is continuing to live in fear while hoping that loan sharks will honor whatever agreement you make with them. Based on my research, that hope is unrealistic, given their history of exploiting borrowers who try to resolve their debts.
The afternoon meeting with Prosecutor Harrison took place in a secure conference room at the federal building downtown. Harrison was a serious man in his 50s, with the careful demeanor of someone who had spent years dealing with dangerous criminal organizations. He listened to Maya's parents describe their situation without interrupting, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification about specific dates and interactions. The pattern you're describing matches what we've seen from this organization in over 30 other cases, Harrison said after hearing their full story. They specifically target middle-class borrowers with temporary financial problems, offering solutions that seem reasonable until the borrowers realize they've been trapped in predatory agreements designed to maximize long-term extraction. Harrison explained that federal investigators had been working on the case for over 2 years, gathering evidence through financial records, surveillance, and interviews with former employees who had become disillusioned with the organization's practices. However, they lacked cooperating witnesses who could testify about specific threats and collection methods that crossed the line into criminal behavior. Your testimony about the harassment, threats, and intimidation tactics would be crucial evidence in our case, Harrison told Maya's parents, but I won't lie to you about the risks involved. Testifying against this organization will require courage, and we can't guarantee that the process will be quick or easy. Maya watched her parents process Harrison's explanation, seeing the fear and uncertainty in their faces as they contemplated the choice between cooperation and continued vulnerability. The prosecutor's honesty about the challenges involved was reassuring, but it also highlighted the difficult reality that safety would require them to confront their tormentors rather than simply hiding from them. Patricia spoke first, her voice steadier than Maya had heard it since their arrival. If we cooperate with your investigation, what happens to other people who might be targeted by this organization? Would our testimony help protect others from going through what we've experienced? Harrison's response seemed to surprise even him with its emotion. Mrs. Chen, in my 23 years as a prosecutor, I've rarely seen an operation this systematic in its exploitation of vulnerable people. Your testimony could help us shut down an organization that has destroyed hundreds of families and stolen millions of dollars from people who were already struggling with legitimate financial problems. The appeal to Patricia's sense of justice and social responsibility seemed to resonate in ways that purely personal considerations had not. Maya could see her mother's posture straightening as she began to think about their situation in terms of moral obligation rather than just personal survival. David remained skeptical but seemed influenced by Patricia's growing determination. What specific protections would you provide, and how long would they last? He asked, focusing on practical details rather than philosophical arguments about justice and social responsibility. Harrison outlined the comprehensive protection package available to cooperating witnesses, including immediate relocation to secure housing, new identities if necessary, financial support during the investigation and trial process, and ongoing protection for as long as credible threats remained. The average timeline from initial cooperation to trial conclusion is 18 to 24 months, Harrison explained. During that period, you would be completely disconnected from your current lives, but safe from retaliation. After successful prosecution, most witnesses are able to return to normal lives, though some choose to maintain their new identities permanently. Maya found herself impressed by the thoroughness of the federal protection program, while also recognizing the enormous psychological challenge her parents would face in surrendering their identities and starting over in their 60s. The decision required them to prioritize long-term safety over short-term comfort, a choice that went against every instinct that had led to their current crisis. The meeting concluded with Harrison giving Maya's parents 48 hours to make their decision about cooperation. The prosecutor emphasized that timing was crucial, as the organization's awareness of their financial distress made them increasingly vulnerable to escalating pressure tactics. During the drive back to Maya's apartment, her parents sat in thoughtful silence, processing what they had learned about their options and the choices they would need to make. Maya could sense that the reality of their situation was finally becoming clear to them, forcing them to confront the fact that their old life was gone regardless of what decisions they made going forward. "I keep thinking about what that prosecutor said about other families," Patricia said as they waited for the elevator in Maya's building. How many other people have been destroyed by these criminals while we've been focused only on our own problems? Maya recognized the shift in her mother's perspective, the movement from victimhood toward a sense of agency and moral responsibility. Perhaps the crisis that had brought them together was also forcing Patricia to examine values and priorities that had been obscured by years of comfortable suburban living. Back in Maya's apartment, the conversation that followed was unlike any discussion the three of them had ever had. For the first time, they were talking as adults facing a common challenge, rather than as parents and child navigating traditional family hierarchies. The crisis had stripped away the pretenses and power dynamics that had defined their previous interactions. David's resistance to federal cooperation was gradually wearing down, as he recognized the logical flaws in his arguments for avoiding confrontation with the loan sharks. "I keep hoping there's a solution that doesn't require us to become completely different people," he admitted, "but I'm starting to understand that the people we were before this crisis were the ones who got us into this situation in the first place."
Maya felt a complex mix of emotions listening to her father acknowledge the need for fundamental change in his approach to life and decision-making. Part of her felt vindicated by his recognition of his poor judgment, while another part felt sad that it had taken such extreme circumstances to force this moment of self-awareness. Patricia had been researching witness protection programs on her phone, reading testimonials from other people who had successfully transitioned to new lives after cooperating with federal investigations. "There are support groups for people in witness protection," she reported, "people who've learned to build new identities and find meaning in their changed circumstances." Maya realized that her parents were beginning to see their crisis not just as a catastrophe to be survived, but as an opportunity for transformation that might ultimately prove beneficial. The perspective shift was remarkable given their initial focus on simply returning to their previous lifestyle without consequences for their poor decisions. As evening approached, Maya found herself feeling cautiously optimistic about her parents' ability to make constructive choices about their future. The terror and desperation that had driven them to her door was being replaced by something that looked like determination and moral clarity. Emma called again that evening, and this time, Maya felt ready to provide a basic outline of what had happened since their last conversation. "My parents showed up at my apartment last night," Maya began, knowing that the simple statement would shock Emma given their 12 years of complete estrangement. Emma's response was immediate and concerned. "Your parents? The ones who threw you out at 18? Maya, what did they want? Are you okay?" Maya explained the basic situation without going into excessive detail, focusing on the fact that her parents were facing serious danger and had come to her for help. She described her decision to fund a legal solution rather than simply paying their debts, and outlined the federal cooperation option they were considering. "I can't believe they had the nerve to show up asking for money after what they did to you," Emma said, her anger on Maya's behalf evident even through the phone connection. "But I'm proud of how you're handling it. Helping them find a legal solution instead of just bailing them out shows incredible wisdom and strength." Emma's support and perspective helped Maya process her own emotions about the situation, confirming that her approach had been guided by sound judgment rather than just emotional reactions. The validation was important because Maya had been second-guessing many of her decisions since her parents' unexpected arrival. "I think they're going to cooperate with the federal investigation," Maya continued. "It's the right thing to do morally, and it's probably their best chance for actual safety rather than just temporary relief. But it means they're going to disappear into witness protection for at least 2 years, possibly permanently." Emma's understanding of the implications was immediate. "So this might be your only chance to have any kind of resolution with them before they become completely different people with new identities. That's a lot of pressure for working through 12 years of hurt and anger." Maya had not fully considered this aspect of the situation until Emma articulated it. If her parents entered witness protection, they would essentially cease to exist as the people who had raised her and then abandoned her. Any opportunity for genuine reconciliation or resolution of their family conflicts would be lost forever. The realization created a new urgency around the emotional aspects of their reunion, forcing Maya to consider whether she wanted to attempt some kind of healing process during the brief window before her parents disappeared into federal protection. The decision felt overwhelming given everything else she was managing. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of emotional work," Maya admitted to Emma.
Part of me thinks it would be easier to help them solve their legal problems and then let them disappear without trying to address everything that happened between us. Emma's response was gentle but direct. Maya, you've spent 12 years building an incredibly successful life despite their abandonment. You've proven that you don't need them for anything practical. But you might need some kind of closure or resolution for your own emotional well-being, regardless of whether you ever have a real relationship with them again. The suggestion that closure might be more important than reconciliation resonated with Maya in ways she had not expected. She had been so focused on the practical aspects of helping her parents that she had not considered what she might need from this encounter for her own psychological health and peace of mind. Maya ended the call with Emma feeling both more clarity and more uncertainty about how to proceed with the emotional dimensions of her parents' crisis. The practical decisions about legal strategies and federal cooperation were becoming clear, but the personal questions about forgiveness, reconciliation, and closure remained complex and unresolved. The next morning brought news that accelerated everyone's timeline for decision-making. David received a phone call from someone claiming to represent their creditors, informing him that the 30-day deadline had been shortened to 1 week due to their failure to provide regular updates about their repayment progress. Maya listened to her father repeat the conversation, noting the increased urgency and menace in the demands being made. The loan sharks were apparently growing impatient with the lack of contact from their borrowers and were escalating their pressure tactics ahead of schedule. They want proof that we have the money within 72 hours, David reported, his voice shaking with renewed fear. If we can't show them a bank statement or some other evidence of our ability to pay, they said the consequences would be immediate and permanent. Maya realized that the accelerated timeline eliminated any remaining options except immediate federal cooperation or flight from the city. Her parents could no longer afford to spend days weighing their choices or gradually working up courage to confront their situation. Within 2 hours of the threatening phone call, Maya had contacted Prosecutor Harrison and arranged for her parents to be taken into protective custody that same afternoon. The decision to cooperate with the federal investigation was no longer a choice to be made deliberately, but a necessity imposed by rapidly escalating danger. The process of entering witness protection moved with surprising speed once the decision was made. Federal marshals arrived at Maya's apartment within 4 hours of Harrison's call, prepared to transport her parents to a secure location where they would begin the process of assuming new identities and preparing their testimony. Maya watched her parents pack the few belongings they had brought with them, knowing that these items represented the last physical connections to their previous lives. Everything else they had owned was either already lost to creditors or would need to be abandoned as they transitioned into federal protection. Patricia approached Maya as the marshals waited in the hallway, her eyes filled with tears but her voice steady. "I know we don't deserve forgiveness for what we did to you 18 years ago," she said quietly.
But I want you to know that watching you handle this crisis has shown me the kind of person you became despite our failures as parents. You're stronger and wiser and more compassionate than we ever taught you to be. Maya felt her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her composure as she listened to her mother's words. The acknowledgement of her strength and character felt like something she had been waiting to hear for 12 years, even though she had convinced herself that her parents' opinions no longer mattered to her. David's farewell was more awkward but equally sincere. "I don't know if we'll ever see each other again after today," he said, extending his hand in a gesture that seemed to acknowledge the formal nature of their reconciliation. "But I want you to know that everything I've read about your success over the years has filled me with pride, even though I knew I had no right to feel that way." Maya found herself shaking her father's hand while fighting back tears that surprised her with their intensity. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite 12 years of anger and abandonment, she discovered that some part of her had never stopped wanting her parents' approval and recognition. The actual moment of departure was abrupt and anticlimactic. The federal marshals escorted Patricia and David to a waiting vehicle, following protocols designed to minimize exposure and risk during the transition to protective custody. Within minutes of their emotional farewells, Maya found herself alone in her apartment, staring at the spaces where her parents had sat for less than 24 hours. The silence that followed their departure felt profound and disorienting. Maya's carefully ordered life had been disrupted by their arrival, and now the disruption was over, leaving her to process what had happened and determine how to move forward with the knowledge and emotions that had been stirred up by their brief reunion. Maya spent the rest of the day working mechanically through routine business tasks, using familiar responsibilities to maintain her emotional equilibrium, while her subconscious processed the complexity of what she had experienced. The contrast between her parents' desperate arrival and their systematic departure illustrated the dramatic changes that could occur in a person's life within the span of a single day. Emma returned from Portland that evening, arriving at Maya's apartment with flowers and takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant. The normalcy of Emma's presence felt both comforting and slightly surreal after the intensity of the previous day's drama. "So tell me everything," Emma said, as they settled onto the couch where Maya's parents had sat less than 24 hours earlier. "Start from the beginning and don't leave out any details. I want to understand what you've been through and how you're feeling about all of it." Maya found that telling the complete story to Emma helped her process her own emotions and reactions to the encounter with her parents. Emma listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions and offering insights that helped Maya understand the significance of what had occurred. "It sounds like you handled an impossible situation with incredible grace and wisdom," Emma said after hearing the full account. "You found a way to help them without compromising your own values or enabling their continued poor judgment. That takes remarkable strength and maturity." Maya felt a sense of completion hearing Emma's assessment of her choices and actions. The validation from someone whose opinion she valued helped her recognize that she had navigated the crisis successfully, maintaining her integrity while providing assistance to people who had once failed her in fundamental ways. Over the following weeks, Maya received occasional updates from Prosecutor Harrison about the progress of the federal investigation and her parents' adaptation to witness protection. The Loan Shark organization had been subjected to increased surveillance following her parents' cooperation, and additional victims had come forward with similar stories of exploitation and intimidation. The legal process moved forward methodically, with Maya's parents providing detailed testimony about their experiences while learning to live under assumed identities in a secure location hundreds of miles from Seattle. Harrison reported that they were adapting well to their new circumstances and seemed relieved to be free from the constant fear that had dominated their lives for months. Maya found herself thinking about her parents less frequently as time passed, but when she did remember their brief reunion, she felt a sense of peace about how the encounter had concluded. She had demonstrated to herself and to them that she could act with strength and compassion even in the face of old wounds and justified anger. The experience had also clarified Maya's understanding of the life she had built with Emma and the values that guided her decisions as a successful entrepreneur and responsible adult. The crisis had tested her character in ways that normal business challenges could not, and she had discovered reserves of wisdom and maturity that she had not known she possessed. 6 months after her parents' departure, Maya received a brief letter forwarded through federal channels. Patricia had written to update her on their progress in witness protection and to thank her again for the help that had literally saved their lives. The letter mentioned that they were both receiving counseling to address the underlying issues that had led to their financial crisis, and that they were learning to build a new life based on different values and priorities. Maya read the letter several times, noting the tone of hope and determination that had replaced the desperation and fear that had characterized her parents during their time in her apartment. The transformation suggested that their crisis might ultimately prove beneficial, forcing them to confront aspects of themselves that had remained hidden during their years of comfortable denial. Maya kept the letter in her desk drawer alongside other important documents, not because she expected to build an ongoing relationship with her parents, but because it represented closure on a chapter of her life that had remained painfully open for 12 years. The knowledge that they were safe and working toward positive change allowed her to finally release the anger and hurt that had shaped so many of her adult decisions. As Maya looked back on the encounter with her parents, she realized that it had provided her with something she had not expected to gain: proof that she had become the kind of person who could respond to crisis with wisdom and compassion, even when the crisis involved people who had once treated her badly. The recognition gave her confidence about her ability to handle whatever challenges might arise, in her future with Emma and in her continued growth as an entrepreneur and community leader.
The storm that had brought her parents to her door had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was different, but ultimately more stable than what had existed before. Maya had emerged from the encounter with a clearer understanding of her own character and values, knowledge that would serve her well in all the relationships and responsibilities that lay ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.